Ever feel like the world is just too much? Yeah. Too noisy and just too busy, too demanding, like maybe you need to just escape. Well, imagine taking that feeling, taking it to the extreme. Imagine packing up, leaving everything behind and heading out to the desert to live alone for decades.
It sounds almost unthinkable, doesn't it, in our hyper-connected world? But that's exactly what St. Anthony of Egypt did back in the 3rd century. And his story, as wild as it might seem, captivated people then, and it continues to fascinate us even now.
It's true. And in this deep dive, we're going to explore why. We're taking a close look at the life of St. Anthony, often called Anthony the Great, through the lens of his biography, The Life of Anthony, written by his contemporary St. Athanasius.
You know what's so compelling about this story is that Anthony wasn't some mystical hermit from birth. He was a regular guy,
Right.
born into a relatively well-off family in Egypt. Around the year 251, he even had a sister to care for after his parents died when he was young.
So he knew what it was like to have responsibilities, to be part of the world. And yet, something called him to a radically different path.
It was a single verse from the gospel, the one where Jesus says, if you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me.
Wow.
That's all it took to set Anthony on a course that would change his life and impact countless others forever.
Talk about a life-altering moment. To
Yeah.
hear that and just decide, yep, that's what I'm doing, is incredible. So he sold everything, arranged for his sister's care, and just went straight to the desert.
Not quite. He actually sought out the guidance of holy men, almost like creating his own personal spiritual mentorship program. Anthony recognized that even in seeking solitude, he needed wisdom and direction from those who had already walked a similar path.
That's a good point. So it wasn't just a reckless impulse. There was real thought and intention behind his actions. But eventually the desert did call right.
Yes, and it's important to understand the significance of this choice. The desert wasn't just a random location. It held profound symbolic meaning, both then and now. We see this motif repeatedly throughout spiritual traditions. Jesus in the wilderness, John the Baptist preaching in the desert, countless mystics and seekers throughout history drawn to the solitude and stark beauty of these landscapes.
So it's not just about physical isolation, but about something deeper.
Exactly. The desert represents a stripping away of distractions, a confrontation with one's inner demons, a place to face your true self without the comforts and illusions of the everyday world. It's a place of intense spiritual testing and transformation. And that's precisely what Anthony sought.
And I imagine he got more testing than he bargained for.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard stories of the temptations he faced, the demons he battled. It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
There's a reason those stories have resonated for centuries. They speak to the universal human experience of temptation, the inner struggles we all face, whether we're living in a desert or a bustling city. One particularly vivid account describes Anthony encountering illusions of gold scattered across the desert sand. Imagine that, after choosing a life of poverty, suddenly being surrounded by the very wealth he renounced.
It's almost like a cruel cosmic joke, isn't it? But Anthony's reaction is what's truly remarkable. He didn't stop, he didn't hesitate, he ran straight through those shimmering piles of gold, as if they were burning hot coals.
That image is so powerful. It speaks volumes about his commitment to his chosen path, his unwavering focus on something beyond material wealth and comfort. He saw those temptations for what they were, illusions that could derail him from his true purpose.
It makes you think about our own gold piles, those shiny distractions that constantly try to pull us off course. Maybe it's that urge to constantly check our phones, the endless cycle of consumerism, the pursuit of status and approval.
Precisely. We all have our own versions of those illusions, those things that promise fulfillment, but ultimately leave us feeling empty and dissatisfied. And Anthony's example challenges us to consider, what would it look like to run through our own gold piles, to refuse to be seduced by those things that ultimately distract us from what truly matters?
It's a powerful image to hold on to, and it speaks to the intensity of Anthony's commitment. It wasn't just about finding peace and quiet in the desert. It was about actively battling those forces, both internal and external, that sought to pull him away from his spiritual path.
And it wasn't a passive battle either. The life of Anthony emphasizes his constant prayer, his unwavering reliance on God as his source of strength and guidance. There's even an account of the devil complaining to Anthony, saying, "You're making the desert a city."
That's fascinating. So even the devil recognized the power of Anthony's example, the way he was inspiring others, and transforming the very landscape around him.
Exactly. It speaks to the ripple effect of one person's commitment, the way our choices can impact not just our own lives, but the world around us.
It really makes you wonder, what would our desert look like today? What distractions would we need to renounce to achieve that same level of focus and connection with something greater than ourselves?
That's a question worth pondering. It's not necessarily about physical isolation, but about identifying
Hmm,
and confronting those things that keep us from fully engaging with our spiritual lives, whatever form that may take.
that's a powerful thought. And speaking of impact, Anthony's story didn't stay hidden in the desert, did it? It seems like his influence spread far beyond the confines of his solitary life.
Absolutely. His story, with its tales of radical commitment and spiritual battles, resonated deeply with early Christians. It became a beacon of inspiration for those seeking a deeper, more meaningful way of life. And it wasn't just the average person on the street who was captivated by Anthony's example.
Oh, who else was drawn to his story?
Well, think of some of the most influential figures in early Christianity. People like St. Augustine, whose writings would shape Christian thought for centuries to come. He was deeply impacted by Anthony's story. In fact, it played a significant role in his own conversion experience.
That's amazing. This desert hermit, seemingly removed from the world, ended up having a profound impact on the course of Christian history.
It really shows you the power of one person's radical commitment. Even in solitude, Anthony's actions sparked a ripple effect. That influenced some of the greatest minds of his time.
And it makes you realize that our choices matter. That even when we think we're alone, our actions can inspire and influence others in ways we may never fully realize. But his influence wasn't just about inspiring grand theological shifts, right? It was about offering a way of life, a path for everyday people seeking a deeper connection with the divine.
You're right. Anthony's story wasn't just for theologians and scholars. It was a blueprint for anyone seeking a more meaningful and fulfilling life. And while most of us aren't called to live as hermits in the desert, are there principles from Anthony's life that we can apply to our own circumstances? I think so.
That's what I'm curious about. It's one thing to admire his dedication, but how do we bridge the gap between his radical choices and our own lives?
Well, one thing that stands out is Anthony's deliberate seeking out of guidance. Remember how he sought out those holy men, those spiritual mentors? That's a lesson for all of us. We don't have to figure everything out on our own. We can learn from those who have walked the path before us, who can offer wisdom and support on our own spiritual journeys.
So it's like having a spiritual GPS system
Right.
guiding us towards our destination. But instead of relying on technology, we're looking to those who embody the qualities we aspire to, the virtues we want to cultivate.
Exactly. And it's not just about seeking external guidance. Anthony also approached Scripture with a deep reverence, believing that God's word spoke directly to him.
So it's about approaching ancient texts with a fresh perspective, allowing them to speak to our own unique lives and challenges. Not just reading the words, but truly listening for the message that resonates within us.
Precisely. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of Anthony's life, the importance of cultivating an interior life. This is something that often gets overlooked in our fast-paced, externally focused world.
That's an intriguing concept. Could you elaborate on what interior life actually means?
It's about recognizing that true transformation happens from within. Anthony's retreat into the desert wasn't just about physical isolation. It was about confronting his inner demons, cultivating discipline, and deepening his relationship with God through practices like prayer, fasting, and almsgiving.
So it's about making conscious choices that prioritize our spiritual well-being, making time for reflection, practicing self-control, and extending generosity to those in need.
Exactly. And these aren't just empty rituals, they're practices that help us build the inner strength and resilience necessary to live a life aligned with our values and beliefs.
It's like building that spiritual muscle, so to speak, so we can resist those temptations that pull us off course and stay focused on what truly matters.
Precisely. And that brings us to what is perhaps the most crucial lesson we can learn from St. Anthony, the power of saying no. When faced with temptation, Anthony didn't hesitate. He made a decisive choice to turn away from anything that might lead him astray.
That takes incredible willpower, but it's that unwavering commitment, that willingness to say no to distractions and temptations, that ultimately allowed Anthony to achieve such a profound connection with the divine. It's a powerful lesson, but it also feels incredibly daunting. How do we cultivate that kind of discipline in a world that's constantly vying for our attention?
That's an excellent question, and it's something we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into specific strategies and practices that can help us cultivate the kind of spiritual resilience that St. Anthony exemplified.
I'm eager to hear more. We'll continue our deep dive into the life and legacy of St. Anthony right after this. Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more insightful explorations into fascinating topics, all designed to help you live a richer, more informed life. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and legacy of St. Anthony the Great. You know, it's amazing to think how one man's choice to embrace solitude and simplicity could spark such a powerful movement even centuries later. But as we've been discussing, it's not about mimicking Anthony's exact path.
Right.
It's about understanding the principles behind his choices and seeing how we might apply them to our own very different lives.
That's a key point. We're not all called to be desert hermits, but we are all called to live intentionally, to make choices that align with our deepest values and aspirations. And that's where Anthony's story can offer, some real guidance.
I'm especially intrigued by the idea of identifying and eliminating distractions. I think we can all relate to feeling overwhelmed by the constant noise and demands of modern life. It's like our minds are always buzzing, never truly at rest.
Absolutely. And think back to Anthony's encounter with those illusions of gold in the desert. He recognized them for what they were. Empty temptations that could easily derail him from his true purpose. And he didn't just ignore them, he actively rejected them, running through them as if they were burning hot coals.
It's such a vivid image, and it makes me wonder, what are our modern-day gold piles? What are those things that glitter and promise fulfillment but ultimately keep us from pursuing what truly matters?
For some, it might be that constant urge to check social media, to stay plugged into the digital world, even when it's draining our energy and attention. For others, it might be the lure of consumerism, the endless pursuit of more that never seems to satisfy. Or maybe it's the pressure to achieve, to climb the ladder of success, even at the expense of our well-being.
It's different for everyone, but I think the common thread is that feeling of being pulled in a million different directions, of never quite feeling present or at peace.
Exactly. And that's where the practice of creating space, both physically and mentally, becomes so crucial. Anthony's desert experience was, in a sense, a radical form of decluttering. He stripped away everything superfluous to focus on what truly mattered, his relationship with God.
So it's not just about cleaning out our closets or simplifying our schedules, though those can be helpful steps. It's about creating space within ourselves, a stillness of mind that allows us to hear our own inner voice, our own deepest desires.
You've hit on a key point. Anthony's solitude wasn't just about physical isolation. It was about cultivating inner stillness, that quiet space where God's presence can be felt.
You know, it's funny, we often associate silence with emptiness, with a lack of something. But what you're describing sounds more like a fullness, a richness. That comes from turning inward and connecting with something deeper within ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's not something that requires us to retreat to a remote hermitage. We can cultivate this inner stillness in the midst of our everyday lives.
So how do we do that? I mean, it's one thing to say create space for silence, but it's quite another to actually do it, especially in our busy, always-on world.
It starts with small, intentional choices. Maybe it's carving out a few minutes each morning to sit in silence, to simply breathe and be present. Or perhaps it's taking a walk in nature, without headphones or distractions, allowing ourselves to be fully immersed in the sights and sounds around us.
I love that. It's about those little pockets of quiet that we can weave into our day, moments where we can disconnect from the external noise and reconnect with ourselves.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this inner stillness, it naturally creates space for another essential practice: prayer. Anthony's life was marked by constant prayer, a continual conversation with God that sustained him through trials and temptations.
It's interesting to think about prayer as a conversation. We often think of it as something formal or ritualistic, but you're describing it as something much more organic, a back-and-forth exchange. That can happen throughout our day.
Precisely. Prayer isn't about reciting memorized words or following a strict formula. It's about opening our hearts and minds to God's presence, sharing our joys and sorrows, our hopes and fears, our longings and gratitudes.
I like the idea that prayer can take so many different forms. It can be spoken or silent. It could be a heartfelt outpouring or a quiet contemplation. The important thing is that it comes from a place of genuine connection and desire.
Beautifully said. And that longing, that desire to connect with something greater than ourselves, is what fuels our spiritual growth. It's what propelled Anthony to embrace such a radical life, not out of deprivation or self-punishment, but out of a deep yearning to experience the fullness of God's presence.
And while we may not be called to the same extremes, I think we can all relate to that longing, that sense that there's something more to life than just the day-to-day grind.
Absolutely. And Anthony's example reminds us that it's not something we have to achieve or earn. It's something we already possess, a spark of the divine that resides within each of us. It's just a matter of clearing away the clutter, both internal and external, that obscures it, from our view.
So we've talked about silence and prayer. What about fasting? That seems like a pretty intense practice, and one that maybe doesn't translate so easily to modern life.
It's true that fasting often conjures up images of strict dietary restrictions, but it's important to remember that fasting is about much more than food. It's about self-control, about intentionally denying ourselves something pleasurable to strengthen our willpower and deepen our awareness of our dependence on God.
So it's like a spiritual boot camp, where we're training our minds and bodies to resist those impulses that can lead us astray. But it doesn't have to be about food.
Exactly. Fasting can take many forms. It could be about abstaining from social media for a day, or giving up a favorite TV show, or even something as simple as choosing to walk instead of drive, even when it's inconvenient. The key is to choose something that requires effort, that challenges us to step outside our comfort zones.
I can see how that would build discipline and resilience. It's like saying no to those instant gratification impulses that we're so accustomed to in our modern world.
Precisely. And by intentionally choosing to forego something we enjoy, we're not punishing ourselves. We're actually creating space for something deeper, something more meaningful to emerge.
I never thought of it that way. It's not about deprivation, but about creating space for something richer to take root.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this discipline, this ability to say no to those fleeting desires, we become more attuned to the whispers of our soul, the guidance that's always there, but often drowned out by the noise of our everyday lives.
That's a powerful image. So we've explored silence, prayer, and fasting. Are there any other lessons we can glean from St. Anthony's life that might help us navigate the complexities of modern life?
There's one aspect of his story that's often overlooked, and that's his commitment to service. While he may have lived as a hermit, Anthony wasn't completely isolated from the world.
So even in his solitude, he found ways to connect with others and make a positive impact.
Yes, he regularly interacted with people who sought his guidance and counsel, and he was known for his acts of charity and compassion.
It's a good reminder that spiritual growth isn't just about personal transformation. It's also about extending that transformation outward into the world around us.
Exactly. It's about putting our faith into action, living out our values in tangible ways that make a difference in the lives of others.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions, however small, can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to the practice of almsgiving, which, like fasting, can be about much more than just donating money. It's about recognizing our abundance, whether it's our time, our talents, or our material resources, and sharing it freely with those in need.
It's about living generously, with open hearts and hands, recognizing that we're all part of a larger community.
Exactly. And that generosity of spirit is what ultimately connects us to God and to each other.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the life of St. Anthony, this radical figure who embraced a life of solitude and spiritual discipline. But we've also discovered that his example, however extreme, offers timeless wisdom that can guide us on our own spiritual journeys. We've talked about finding those pockets of quiet in our busy lives, cultivating a deep and abiding connection with God through prayer, and practicing self-control and generosity in our daily actions. But it seems like there's a unifying thread running through all of these practices.
What do you see as the connecting thread?
Well, it seems like it all comes down to intentionality. St. Anthony's life wasn't just about doing things. It was about doing them with purpose, with awareness. Whether it was carving out time for silence, choosing to fast from certain pleasures, or extending a helping hand to someone in need, it was the intention behind his actions that gave them meaning and power. And that's something we can all strive for. Even in the midst of our busy modern lives, it's about bringing that same level of awareness to our choices, recognizing that even the smallest actions, when done with intention, can ripple outward and create positive change. What do you think?
I think you've hit on a profound truth. Intentionality is the key that unlocks the transformative power of these practices. It's what elevates our actions from mere routines to meaningful expressions of our values. And as we cultivate this awareness, this mindfulness in our daily lives, we begin to align ourselves with the deeper currents of grace and wisdom that are always flowing around us, waiting to be tapped into.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it gives me hope that even in our chaotic world, we can still find moments of peace, connection, and meaning. We can still choose to live intentionally, to make choices that reflect our deepest values and aspirations.
Absolutely. And as we continue our exploration of St. Anthony's legacy, we'll delve deeper into the practical ways we can cultivate this intentionality in our everyday lives.
I'm eager to hear more. We'll continue our deep dive into the life and legacy of St. Anthony right after this. Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more insightful explorations into fascinating topics, all designed to help you live a richer, more informed life. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the life and legacy of St. Anthony, this remarkable figure who chose to leave the world behind and embrace a life of solitude and spiritual discipline in the Egyptian desert.
It's been a fascinating exploration, hasn't it? We've delved into the challenges he faced, the temptations he overcame, and the profound impact his choices had on those around him. And we've also begun to uncover the ways in which his story, however extreme it may seem, can speak to our own lives and aspirations.
It's been eye-opening, to say the least. I think we've all had moments where we felt that pull towards simplicity, that yearning for a quieter, more intentional way of being. But then reality sets in, and we get swept back into the busyness and distractions of everyday life.
It's the age-old struggle, isn't it? The world is full of things vying for our attention, pulling us in countless directions. But Anthony's example reminds us that we have a choice. We can choose to be swept along by the current, or we can choose to chart our own course, to create a life that reflects our deepest values and aspirations.
And that's where the practices we've been discussing come in, right? Creating space for silence, deepening our connection with the divine through prayer, practicing self-control, extending generosity to those in need. These aren't just random acts of self-improvement. They're tools that help us cultivate a deeper sense of awareness, a more intentional way of being in the world.
Precisely. Think of Anthony's deliberate choice to retreat to the desert. It wasn't a rejection of the world, so much as a redirection of focus. He recognized that to truly connect with God, to cultivate a life of purpose and meaning, he needed to strip away everything superfluous, all those things that cluttered his mind and distracted him from his true calling.
It's almost like he created a filter, allowing only the most essential elements through. And what remained was a life of profound simplicity, focused on prayer, contemplation, and service to others.
A beautiful image. And it speaks to the power of intentionality, a concept we touched on earlier. It's not just about doing things, but about doing them with purpose, with awareness. It's about bringing our full presence to each moment, each choice, each action.
I can see how that would make a world of difference. It's like the difference between rushing through our day on autopilot and savoring each moment, each encounter as a gift.
That's it, exactly. And it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of mindfulness. It's about cultivating a habit of awareness, a gentle noticing of where our attention is going and making conscious choices to redirect it toward those things that nourish our souls and align us with our deepest values.
So how do we begin to cultivate this intentionality? Are there specific practices or techniques that we can incorporate into our daily lives?
One powerful practice is simply to pause throughout the day and ask ourselves, what am I giving my attention to right now? Is this serving me or is it draining me? Is this aligned with my values or is it leading me astray?
It sounds so simple, yet I can imagine it's quite challenging to actually do. Our minds are so accustomed to flitting from one thing to the next. It takes real effort to stop and become aware of what's happening in the present moment.
It does take effort, but the rewards are well worth it. As we practice this mindful awareness, we begin to notice patterns in our behavior. We become more conscious of those things that trigger us, that pull us off course, and we develop the ability to choose differently.
So it's not about suppressing or denying those thoughts and feelings, but observing them with curiosity and compassion, and then choosing how we want to respond.
Exactly. And remember, this is a lifelong practice. There will be times when we fall back into old habits, when we get swept away by the current. But the key is to keep returning to that intention, that desire to live with greater awareness and purpose.
It's a journey, not a destination. And it's comforting to know that we don't have to be perfect at it. We can stumble, we can fall, but as long as we keep getting back up and reorienting ourselves toward that deeper intention, we're moving in the right direction.
Beautifully said. And remember, we don't have to do this alone. Just as Anthony sought out guidance from those further along the path, we too can find support and encouragement from spiritual mentors, teachers, or even trusted friends who share our values and aspirations.
It's a reminder that community plays a vital role in our spiritual growth. We can learn from each other, encourage each other, and hold each other accountable on this journey toward a more intentional and fulfilling life.
And as we cultivate this intentionality, this mindful awareness of our choices and actions, we begin to embody the spirit of St. Anthony, Not in the literal sense of retreating to the desert, but in the deeper sense of creating a life that reflects our deepest values and aspirations. We become beacons of light, radiating peace, compassion, and purpose into the world around us.
That's a powerful image. And it gives me hope that even in the midst of the chaos and distractions of modern life, we can still find a path toward meaning, connection, and fulfillment. We can still choose to live with intention, to make a difference, and to leave the world a little brighter than we found it.
That's a beautiful sentiment. And as we conclude our deep dive into the life of St. Anthony, let us carry that inspiration with us. May we all find the courage to embrace the silence, to deepen our connection with the divine, and to live with intention and purpose each and every day.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Remember, you can find more deep dives into fascinating topics on our website, and be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.